Welcome back. We are live on Sports to Suit, where weekly I highlight former athletes that are doing some incredible things in business. And I am so excited to have this conversation with Abby today because she's a former football player and soccer player and track athlete. So I know that this is going to deliver a ton of inspiration to young ladies and women all over the place. But Abby, first off, thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be joining you. Also, that was a really cool intro. I was so shocked to watch that. I was like, awesome.
Well, Scott Schutte. So shout out to Scott Schutte. So he's a good friend of mine, and he put that together and was like, "Here, I did this for you. Check it out." And I was like, "That's amazing." So we've been using it ever since. So thanks for shouting out some kudos to Scott. But Abby, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about your background, because it is super impressive.
Yeah, so I will say it's a little bit interesting. I was a female football player, so I was a kicker for my high school football team, which was the greatest experience of my life. I really enjoy it, and it's led me to a lot of passions that I have now working in sports. Before that, I played soccer for the majority of my life, and then I also ran track in high school as well. And to that, I got into sports broadcasting when I was 16 years old, and I've been working in that industry up until now. And it's been a wild ride. I've gotten to cover camps at AT&T Stadium, and I've gotten to interview athletes that I never would have thought I've gotten to interview. I've gotten to interview Super Bowl winning coaches. It's been a crazy ride since I was 16 up until now, where I'm 21, but it's amazing and it's been so enjoyable, and I couldn't be more grateful for the lessons that I've learned from playing sports to sharing them.
Well, I am super excited. So let's dive into, because I'm sure people are super curious about this, because I'm curious about it. So I want to talk a little bit about your background in football, because you're a kicker, and I want to know a little bit more about that entire experience, because from an outside looking in, you would think ladies in football, because that's not normal, right? But you've had an incredible experience. So I want to dive a little bit into your story. Like, how did you get into football?
Yeah, so it was really funny. Actually, I kind of come from a family of female football players. So my sister,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, so my sister played before I did. And so after she got done, she was a senior when I was a freshman. I ended up joining the football team after she had left. And it was really cool. And I think one of the things that was really important for both of us and that turned out to be really cool is she had her number. I got to wear the same number. And it was funny because I remember we were all arguing over football numbers. And one of the other guys was like, I want to be number 40. And I remember my coach being like, that's not going to happen. It's Abby's number. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. But I say that to say this, I come from a family of athletes. I come from a family of female football players, and it's been amazing. I will say it was definitely interesting. I remember my first day, it was 6 a.m. and we had to go to workouts, and I was like, what have I gotten myself into? Because unfortunately at the time, I'm still playing soccer full time. I'm still a travel soccer athlete. So I'm having to work out at 6:30. I still got practice tomorrow night or tonight. And so it's it was really, really exhausting. But I think that experience has prepared me for some of the work that I'm doing now and how exhausting it can be, being on the other side of it and working in sports. So it was a great experience, but I'm so glad that my family and I have been able to share that. Especially my sister and I, it's really bonded us together, and I couldn't be more grateful for the experience itself.
Well, and how did the team, how did the team react? If your sister started that and then you kind of came in, I would imagine she kind of paved the way a little bit for that. But I'm curious how the team, dynamics worked, right? Because I would assume you were the only female football player, right? And so how did they either encourage or discourage? I'm curious as well about how did all of the guys see you as a female football player?
Yeah, so it was very, very interesting to watch happen, because obviously she paved the way a little bit for me, which I couldn't be more grateful. Honestly, it made my experience easy. Kudos to her for that. And she's probably going to watch this back and be like, oh my God. But
Laura just jumped in and said, I'm so proud of you, Abby.
That is definitely my grandma. So thank you.
Oh, hey, that's okay. My mom is my number one fan. If anybody's on here, it's my mom.
Yeah. So I feel like I was really well received by them. And one of the cool things about being a female football player was they wanted me to succeed just as bad as they did. And I think a part of that comes from being a kicker, because kickers win and lose ball games all the time. We've seen it happen. But I say that to say this, playing and being a part of the team, they supported me wholeheartedly, from both being a soccer player. I remember so many of my teammates would come to my games and be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you. You did X, Y, and Z, whatever." But then on top of it, they were in the weight room with me, and I had to work out with them. We all had to do the same things together. And so it was kind of one of those embrace the suck situations, all of us together. And it really created a bond for all of us. I still consider them all my brothers. We still talk regularly. And I love my teammates, so much. And my coaches, they were all so influential in my life. Everyone, I think, received me so well, and I received them so well. And it, like I said, it laid this foundation for relationships that I was not expecting. So yeah.
That's my mom.
I love it.
And so it sounds like you have a really good family dynamic as well. And so did your sister, because I don't really want to get into her experiences because she paved the way, but did she kind of experience some of the same things as well, as far as like the support, or was there some challenges there straight out of the gate and then she had to kind of overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so I think it was a bit of both, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, after a while, you're playing similar teams and whatnot, you're going to see a female football player on this team. Like, it's going to happen. I think a lot of players and teams got used to that. But I know that her and I experienced similar situations. For me, for example, it was like homecoming at one high school, and I remember we're going through after the game, and we're all saying good game, and one of the other athletes grabs my mask and is like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Whoa, back up." I know that she also experienced similar things where other teams didn't receive her very well, and it got very interesting. And I know for her and I both, we would always hear interesting comments and whatnot on the sideline. So it was definitely interesting to see it happen from other teams' perspectives as well. But yeah, I think a lot of our experiences were very, very similar in that way, regardless of, who was there first or who came after that.
Well, I would imagine that if the guys on the other team are kind of making comments and stuff, if you had a great team and great relationship with your existing team, that they kind of supported you through that.
Oh yeah, they did not put up with that at all. They did not put up with that. I still remember he grabbed my face mask, and then my guy that's behind me pushes me forward, and I was like, "Well, I guess I'm still walking, so we're good to go."
Oh my goodness. And you're so you're just so bubbly and positive. And so I can't imagine during game days, because it's intense, right? And so you have to throw that intensity on.
It's so intense. And I think for me and for my sister as well, the hardest thing about it was, like I said, we were multi-sport athletes at the time. So I still had soccer practice before a Friday night football game. I had to be at soccer practice. And it's funny because I remember this too. We would get done with soccer practice, run upstairs to the locker, or run up the hill to the locker room, go change really quickly. And we had to be out of our individual locker room before the refs got there, because that was actually their locker room. So I got kicked out, had to go to the training room, and then ride the bike for an hour, because if our legs got cold, it was cramp season.
So how did you prepare for that? Because I would imagine, like you said, it translates over to the business community, right? How did you prepare for that? Was it something that you eased into? Was it something that you just were like, I'm committed to this, I'm going to rock and roll? Tell me a little bit about how you got prepared, because I can't imagine juggling, the soccer, the school, then jumping into football practice, and then all of the games and all the extracurricular trainings that occur through that. Tell me a little bit about how you got prepared for all of that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it had to do with conversations that I had with my sister, and a lot of her experiences. She kind of guided me and mentored me in that way. But with that being said, I think a lot of it came from just this mindset of I don't have another option. And I think that, whether that's healthy or not, or controversial or not, whatever, that's kind of the mindset that's always pushed me, is I have to do this because it's what I want. And it's something that I feel like I have to prove it to myself. I don't necessarily have to go out and prove it to a bunch of men that I can go play football. I have to prove to myself that I can do this. And if I've made it this far, why am I going to stop now? Which was really what pushed me to keep going when I was exhausted. And I'm not going to lie, there were days where I was like, what have I got myself into? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? And I think we all kind of experienced that. But for me, it was definitely challenging. But once I shifted my thinking to, I don't have another option. I have to keep doing this. I have to keep going because I've made it this far. It really propelled me forward.
Well, it's discipline and it's commitment to the goal, right? So it's like setting the goal and then putting around the structure and the discipline to actually execute that goal.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you get in the mindset of like, this is what I'm going to do, like, especially with athletes, like you're committed to that, right? And like, you're going to do what you need to do to execute that.
Exactly. And anyone that's played a team sport knows, you know, I'm not letting my teammates down. I'm not letting my brothers down. I'm not letting my sisters down. Like, I have to be there for them. It's not about me at this point. Yeah, I have to do this so I can prove it to myself, but it's not about me because at the end of the day, they need me more than I need them.
That's amazing. And that applies to business too, right? Like when you're part of a team, like it is a team effort, regardless of what you're working on. Like if you're working on a project, everybody has to jump in and execute that work. And if you're relying on what the other person is doing, if they don't do it, you don't get to the goal, right? And so when you are part of a team, regardless of whether or not it's on the field, whether or not it's, you know, even as a family, like if you set goals, you execute those goals. And you know, even if somebody's a weaker link, you have to pick those people up and say, yep, we're gonna move to this goal and we're gonna work together to get this thing done.
1000% you have to. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're the strongest link on the team or the weakest link on the team. The goal is still the same for everyone across the organization or the team or whatever. And I think that's kind of the same mentality that I have every day that I go into work is I have to help my team and I have to propel my team, even if I am the weakest link in this situation, or maybe if I'm not, like whatever the case may be, I have to be there to support them because if nothing else, so one of the things that I feel like is a key value of mine is there's always this next man up mentality. There's always going to be somebody that comes in behind you. There's always going to be somebody that can do your job better than you. There's always going to be somebody else. So why not be there for your teammates? Why not be there be the next man up in line? Why not be the person that learns the most so that when the weakest link does fall through, you're able to help? Or why not be the next man up in whatever the case may be? So that's one of the things that I really have instilled in myself, I think. But
where did that come from? Like, do you think that is just a natural tendency, or do you think it's something that's a learned behavior? Do you think it's a combination of both? Like, where did that? It's like tenacity. Where did it come from?
I would say it's a combination of both. Because you know, playing sports my entire life, I always knew, and I'm extremely competitive by nature, like almost to a fault. I compete in everything that I do. It's a legitimate problem. But I say that to say this, like I always knew there was always going to be somebody else behind me. And I say that because while yes, I try to work and live my life in a way that I can be somewhat indispensable, that's not possible. You can't always be indispensable. Yeah. And so I've always tried to just keep that in mind. And it's funny because I never really gave a lot of thought to that idea until I started getting into sports broadcasting. And I remember we were on a live stream and we were talking about the quarterback situation at the University of Tennessee. And I was like, there's the next man up. There's somebody else that's going to come behind you that's going to be able to do, you know, what you can do better. What are you going to do to fix that? And so I think that was when I finally put, I guess, a name to it. But before that, it's always just a thought that I've had in the back of my mind is there's always somebody that can replace you.
So how did you get into sports broadcasting? Like you said that you got into it at 16. Is it just something that kind of fell, you know, as an opportunity, or was it something that you like how did you get into broadcasting?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. And like I said, my teammates and I still talk regularly. I owe them everything pretty much. But so what's funny is I had been talking to one of my teammates at the time, and he was actually like one of the key guys in my workout group because we all had like different lift groups that we were with every morning. And he and I were talking, and I was like, I really want to work on SEC Network one day. Like, that's like my dream job is I want to work for ESPN and be on SEC Network. Like, I want to be Laura Rutledge. That's what I want to do. And he's like, okay. And so I remember we were talking about it. Well, he saw on Twitter that D1 Highlights had been looking for interns. And so he's like, hey, this is an opportunity for you. And I was like, okay. And so I applied, and I was like, I legitimately was like, I'm not getting this. Like, I'm 16 years old. I'm in high school. Like, I have no experience. Like, there's no way this is gonna happen.
And you were playing soccer, and you were playing football, and you were going to school. Like,
yeah. And so I was like, this is not gonna happen for me. Well, ironically enough, it did. And then from there, it just kind of spiraled. So my first game of the year that season, I went back because I had transferred schools. I went back to my old high school because it was a really important game to me, and I had stopped playing football at the time, and so it was like I felt like this was really, really important for that I had to be there for my teammates, regardless of whether I could, you know, put on the pads or not. So I went to the game, and I ended up running into another reporter and he was like, hey, do you want to be on this like pilot show with me? And I was like, sure, absolutely. But ironically enough, I got to cover my football team that I had worked out with and I had trained with and I had been with.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was so cool and I felt really honored. And it, in a way, it made it not so difficult to have to leave them behind.
Yeah.
Because I was there every day and I was able to talk about what they were doing and able to be a part of the experience and a part of the story.
Well, and it probably helped you with the confidence because you knew them a little bit. So like, it wasn't like you were going straight into it empty-handed, right? Like you kind of knew a little bit about the dynamics and the people and how to talk about it. And so like, I would imagine that kind of helped out a little bit as well.
It really did. And I think that was really a foundational piece in my learning, especially in journalism and reporting. And it was helpful too, because I'm not shy at all. Like I am very direct and not shy. Like it's another personality trait that I just happen to have. But I say that to say this, it made it a little bit easier to be like, hey, let's go. We're going to go do an interview. Like, let's talk. Whereas before I would have to walk up to like random people and be like, hey, can I interview you? And that is way more intimidating to me than ever having to put on a pair of football pads. Like,
well, and when athletes are like in the zone, I would imagine you like going and interrupting them to be like, hey, can we have a quick interview? Like that throws off their game a little bit. So like they may be a little bit reluctant to have that conversation.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is I think, and it sounds weird now thinking about it, but there were actually times where there was athletes I would interview and they'd be like, wait a minute, didn't you play football? And I was like, yeah, how you know that? And so it got kind of weird in that way. But I say that to say this, it's hard to interrupt an athlete when they're in their headspace because I've been there before. And I know how much I hated being interrupted, or I hated I didn't do small talk well on the sidelines and whatnot. So I really struggled with that as a reporter because I was like, I don't know how to go and interrupt their, brain space or their workflow or whatever they have going on. But I think that having that experience of working with my own football team was so helpful.
Did you find that like just your experience on the field and like this whole like team environment and like all this support? Oh, we've got another comment in here. Just remember the time you took the player's hat and just won this.
So I always wanted to wear a state title hat, and the guys that I was interning with at the time, he was like, just take his hat, just wear it. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it. So I took it. And I was like, hey, can I wear this? I've always wanted to, so it'll be fine. And yeah, that's what happened.
Did you always report on football, or were you reporting on all sorts of different sports, or?
Yeah, so I've always covered football predominantly until I got to college. And then when I was with UT, I started covering basketball a little bit more, which is something that I've always wanted to kind of branch into. But let's think about it this way. I'm 5'1", and I don't know how that career is going to go in basketball reporting because, we're talking about like way over 6 foot guys. It's just not going to work.
Well, football, they're pretty big too. I'm 5'2", 5'3" on a good day. So like I can totally relate because some of these guys are 6'7", 6'8", 6'9". And so you're standing at like a huge gap there.
It's crazy. And it's funny because I was like, I don't want to it got to the point where I started thinking about like what I was wearing, but I was like, I don't have another option. I have to wear heels. Like I legitimately.
They're not going to be able to see. But that makes you stand out. So like, how's your experience been just as, a reporter in like, I know that you're super passionate about it, right? You can tell that you're just uber passionate about sports, but like, what are maybe some of the challenges that you've seen as a female reporter in the sports community?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of them, working with different fan bases and working with different groups of people. There's always going to be somebody that doesn't necessarily like your opinion on the matter. And being a female sports reporter, one of the things that I always struggled with is I always felt the need to prove my knowledge or prove what I know. Well, I've been studying game film for a very, very long time, so I know what I know. But I said this to say this, one of the things that I ended up doing was I would interview other people that would back up my knowledge or back up my credentials that I had. And so I said that to say this, I struggled a lot with that, but I think that's kind of a recurring theme is we've really got to start to break down the barrier and break down the walls of women in sports. And like, they're here to stay. It's going to happen. We are doing an amazing job of making it happen. And I love that we're seeing it more every day. I think regularly.
Well, it's a value add. Like, women play a very, very powerful role in the sports community.
Well, and not to get too controversial, but it's no longer, let's stick a woman on the sidelines and let them be a sex symbol. Like now it's actually way more than that. They actually have brains. We have, I think it was Baltimore Orioles that had like an all-female broadcasting group for the first time. And I mean, let's think about that. That's huge, right? And so I say that to say this, it's now a complete value add. And I think it brings interesting perspectives, and it brings, controversial perspectives at times. But I think that it's so important, and going forward, it's, going to be what's key, especially in sports journalism.
Well, and it challenges topics, right? We come from things from a different perspective, different walk of life, right? And like, I love seeing athletes, there's athletes left and right that, were training, while they were pregnant, and now they're, success. Like it's, we come from a different place, but it's such a value add. And I'm also very excited to see, how the community is receptive towards female athletes. And not just that, but, there's a lot of conversations around female athletes getting paid and, equal rights and all those good things. And I love to see that as well. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so I love to see, equal rights, and, whether female athletes should get paid more, whether they should be paid the same, whatever that may be. And I think that those conversations are becoming more and more clear and more transparent, which is trending in the right direction. Obviously, me as a female, I want us to be there. I want to get paid the same amount as a man does. Like, and I know that sounds a little bit controversial, but we've all looked at the statistics. If you're interested in sports at all, you know that women don't get paid the same. And so I say that to say this, I really, truly love seeing these conversations come up more and more and more. And the reason for that is because I think that having more transparent conversations, having these honest conversations, and even if people don't like it, I think it really sets a precedent, and it begins to push us in the right direction. It may be slower than we'd like, and I hate that. I really do. Yeah. But it opens up the floor for things that need to be talked about and need to be discussed.
Well, and that's in business too. Like, if people can just start having transparent conversations, even if you're coming from different sides of the topic, right? Like, breaking down those walls and just saying, look, we may disagree, but we need to have these conversations. We need to talk about these difficult subjects, and we need to come out with some type of resolution here. Like, transparent conversations are everything. And so I'm even seeing it from a business perspective of like, these things need to happen, and we all need to support each other from a team perspective and talk about these topics, and know that we all have different backgrounds. We all have different, biases, and we have all these different things. But if everybody comes to the table to talk about these things, that's powerful.
I agree. And, I had a conversation about that. I think it was Tuesday this week or something like earlier this week. It's a weird week now that there's only 4 days. But I had a conversation about that earlier this week. And one of the things that, was kind of discussed was that we have to start talking about them. We may not be on the same page politically. We may not be on the same page religiously. We may not be on the same page in business. We may not be on the same page in anything at all. But if we can sit down and actually just have a genuine conversation about it, I think it will propel us a lot further, especially
and not get angry too. Like even if the conversations need to be prefaced, look, like, this is a difficult topic. This is something that there may be some controversy around, but we need to stay level-headed here. We need to talk about these things so that we can come up with some type of resolution.
Yeah. And I think too, it goes to a little bit of the feedback side of things. For me personally, like I said, I'm very direct, and I want somebody that I work with to be very direct with me. When I take feedback from somebody, if something isn't good, I want you to tell me it's not good, because I'm not going to get any better if you don't tell me I'm doing a bad job. I need it to be said in very simple, very plain terms. This sucks. That's how And I say that to say this because I have to take my feelings out of the matter. I actually read a book a while back during the summer it specifically said in the book, it's called Spark. It's a really, really great book. I recommend it to anybody. But in the book, it specifically said, I remember highlighting it, it said, take your feelings out of feedback. And that's not because, things can't be hard to hear or whatever the case may be, but because, it's hard to receive feedback. I totally understand that completely. But at the same time, it's not meant to hurt your feelings. It's meant to make you better. And that's one of the things that I try to, continue to think about. And I say that to say this, it goes along with those transparent conversations of, you should be able to receive feedback, have hard conversations, and at the end of the day, walk away from it and still be like, okay.
Well, I think it's self-awareness too. Like, I love how bold you are in this, but the reality is some people don't receive feedback nearly as black and white as other people, right? And so this is a sales tip. So if anybody's listening in a sales role, one of the most powerful sales tips that I have is ask your prospect how they want to be communicated with, whether it's text, email, phone.
Love that.
Let them set the expectations on how you communicate. I've seen so much success in this because it levels the playing field and it puts them in the control seat of how the communication is going to happen. And so when it comes to the transparent conversations as well, like, have self-awareness around how you want to be communicated towards, and don't be afraid to communicate that. Like, share with the other person, hey, this is how I receive feedback.
Yeah, it's important to say, you know, upfront, let's set the precedent of, I need to be able to see your face when you're telling me something isn't good, because I need to be able to know you're not mad at me. I think that's a lot of where feedback kind of gets broken down in there, is that people will hear things and be like, oh my gosh, they're mad at me because they're texting this to me. And it's like, I promise they're not mad at you. It's just the way that they're coming off in the text message. If I type and put a period at the end of my text messages, somebody probably thinks I'm mad, but I'm really not, I promise. But with that being said, you know, I think that that's so important. And that's a great value add piece that you just mentioned, is, you know, knowing the best way that you receive feedback. And you're right, it is a self-awareness thing. And it takes a long time to get to a place of self-awareness and understanding where you are and your self-awareness journey and things like that. But I think that it's really, really important to know those things.
So I want to ask you, because, you know, for any parents out there, I mean, you were a young lady juggling all these different things, high level sports, playing football, which is a little bit controversial, right? Like, and I don't believe you have kids, but I want to know from like a parent perspective, like, what are some things that maybe your parents did that kind of helped supported you through this entire journey? Because it's a lot.
Yeah, so my family was super supportive, specifically my grandparents. I don't think there was a game they ever missed. And they did an amazing job of taking care of my sister and I both. And I say that to say this, you know, one of the things that I think that they did that, you know, was super supportive and helpful for me is they always took us to practice in the mornings, which I know that sounds like a dumb thing now, but looking back on 14, 15-year-old me, 16-year-old me, and thinking, okay, I got to have these times with my grandparents. I got to talk about how excited I was for my day or what was going on. And even if we didn't talk, it was just so helpful having them there and just knowing they were always there to support me. And two, you know, like I said, knowing that there was always somebody in the stands watching me. Because there was, as a kicker, you're not always on the football field, or especially as a girl, you're not always on the football field. Like, there's always somebody else ahead of you. But I said that to say this, just knowing someone was there to watch me was so important. And it was so helpful. We always had, you know, honest conversations, I think, about where things were in sports. And we were always, you know, as exhausted as I would be sometimes, and they would always be there to support me. And even if I was really, really grumpy, or even if I did need to take a nap as soon as I got home and it was 9 p.m., I think that was really important for me, and it was really helpful.
Well, and they probably learn on phones. Like, that's one thing that is like such a challenge for me to overcome, because we're on our phones, we've got constant distractions and stuff like that. But even like, my daughter plays travel soccer. So even now, she's 11, I see how taking away the phone or taking away the email and making sure that you're there, and not just physically there, but present in the moment, and is so critical.
I agree completely. And that was one of the big things that my grandparents did, was whether my sister, I'm not going to lie, my sister and I totally fought them on this, but like, they wanted to have family dinners. We were like, no, like, but I think that's part of it. It's like the, you know, moody teenager, like, no, I'm not in the mood for this. I want to hang out with my friends. But they were always advocating for those things and always trying to, you know, instill different things that were, I guess, now that I think about it and looking back, were like family traditions that I never knew. Like, one of the things that I think is so funny and is, yes, we did get we also went to Waffle House regularly.
Shout out to Grandma. She's still supporting. I love this.
Watching this whole thing. But one of the other things that, like, I think about it now and it's so dumb, but it's like, it makes me happy every holiday. And we've always done this, is we have this stupid little game that we play that's a card game. It's called Spoons. We play it at every holiday. Everyone that comes over, like, we always play this game. But I say that to say this, knowing that my family was there to support me and knowing that we all had this, you know, tight knit thing was so helpful for me, because, you know, families can be challenging at times. Families can be difficult at times. For me personally, I'm going to be straightforward. I did not have a dad in my life growing up, which I think made it really hard for me to be a female football player, but it made it a really interesting thing, because my coaches were like dads to me. They were like father figures to me. And I needed that in my life at the time. And I still need that in my life. I still reach out to them when I need anything.
Same here. Like, my coach was like very much a father figure. My grandfather was very much a father figure. and I think that it's so important for kids, especially kids of like high performance athletes, to have some type of support or have some type of mentorship network in regards to it, because it's like you said, it's tough. Like you're juggling a million different things. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of even anxiety at sometimes. But like if you have that support network where you can just be a kid.
Well, and I think too, I talk about my grandparents a lot, but for me, one of the things that was really important was knowing they were always there and knowing they would never miss a game. And this is no diss to anybody else in my family, but I never had to think about anybody else missing my games because I just knew they were there and I didn't think about anything else. And with that being said, it's back to the whole, having support and having those coaches and having those mentors. I'm going to be honest with you. It's isolating being a female football player. And I don't say that lightly, but legitimately, I had to go train in a locker room, be by myself for the majority of the mornings. I had to work out by myself from time to time. I had to, go hide in the training room and, ride the bike until it was game time. Like I couldn't go in the boys' locker room, and I didn't want to, but
well, and nobody else other than your sister really understood what was going on, like because they couldn't relate to it. It wasn't like you had. I mean, I would imagine the school didn't have a ton of female football players running around.
No, they didn't, and I think about it now, and it was very isolating. But I think it's made me work alone very well. But it's also made me work with a team really well. So it's created a lot of different interesting dynamics in my thought process and whatnot. But with that being said, I think not having that, it led to my coaches really having to mentor me, because I'm going to be honest with you, literally right across the hallway was the coach's office, and I would just go sit in there all the time and get on their nerves because why not? But with that said, I loved having their mentorship and their leadership and whatnot, because like I said, it was something I needed at the time, but also having it for my family, but also having that extra bit of support and the extra hands with my coaches was so crucial for my life.
We have a couple of really good comments coming in. So Scott's the one that made the video. Scott, thanks for shouting out self-awareness as the building blocks for emotional intelligence. Could not agree more. And, I actually was talking to Scott about this morning, is like, there's a big shift about emotional intelligence, self-awareness in corporate right now, in business, being self-aware, making sure that, you're operating from a place of not emotional intelligence, not toxicity. So I love that comment. And then we've got Chris who's saying love spoons and very competitive, very long range discussion.
Spoons is a great game. It's a great game. I think
I'm gonna have to check it out, and I'm about as competitive as you are, so we may have to figure out a way to play it. I also got a message as a text and said, just to give you a little feedback, she sounds about as fearless as someone I know. Clear. But that's like, I'm trying to figure out, because we're both very bold, competitive, fearless women, and it's like, where did that come from? And how, as a kid, like, where do you think yours come from? Because we talked about it. You said it's a combination of both, but like, can you think of something that like sparked that within you?
I mean, I think a lot of it, and I'm going to be honest and speak very frankly here. I haven't always been that way. I think part of it comes from, my sister's personality growing up with her. Like she is that way. If you watch us talk next to each other, we're the exact same person. It's disgusting. At the same time, it's taken a lot of therapy. I'm gonna be honest with you. It took a lot of therapy for me to get past a lot of anxiety that I had and a lot of situations that I had to overcome and, circumstances that I had to learn to grow past and become more self-aware. And I think that going through therapy, and I recommend anybody that, has the means to or can definitely go. It's so important and it's so good for you. It's built me up to be the confident person that I am today. And I'm not going to lie. I think it comes off sometimes as a little bit more confident than I intended. I'm not always as confident as I look. I'm not always as, bubbly as I tend to be. And we don't always, what we show isn't always real. I mean, let's be honest.
Well, and that's the athlete too. Like being an athlete is, when it's game time, right? Like you have to put on your face when it's game time. And when you're in practice, it's a little bit of a different scenario, but when it's time to compete or it's game time, you know when to throw that on. And so I don't know about you, but I'm so grateful also for, the focus on mental health in sports. I think that that's something that's been lacking for quite some time. And I think it's a really great thing that people are starting to talk about these controversial topics, especially mental health.
Yeah, I'm a huge mental health advocate. I actually am a certified speaker for NAMI. And I think that mental health, I could literally go on and on and on about it for days. It's something that I find to be incredibly challenging. It's difficult to talk about. No one likes to talk in front of people and be like, oh my gosh, I have anxiety, or oh my gosh, I have depression. And I'm not going to lie, like, I've gone through my stints of anxiety. I've gone through my stints of depression. I've gone through, many, many different scenarios that a lot of people my age shouldn't have to or don't have to. And I think a lot of that also comes from being an athlete and understanding some of this comes from the pressures that we put on ourselves, because I know personally as an athlete, I put immense pressure on myself day in, day out. I do that at work. I do that when I'm working out. I do that in my personal life with friends. I do that in everything. And I put so much pressure on myself. And I think some of that, healthy or unhealthy, definitely came from my coach used to tell us pressure makes diamonds. And so I believed that. And I think I took it a little bit too far to heart. But with that said, it definitely has affected my mental health. And I think that it's so important to go to therapy. And I'm glad that we're starting to open up and have more transparent conversations about mental health, because when we stop talking about it, it gets dangerous. I'm not going to lie. Like, when we stop talking, or myself personally, when I stop talking, we have a problem. And that's how I've kind of always led my life, and how I've always tried to push other people in my life and other friends and other athletes that I know. It's so important. You have to talk about mental health. You have to talk about what you're going through, because when you stop talking, it gets dangerous. And I also learned a lot of that from, I worked with speaker, sportscaster Rachel Barbeau for a while with Changing the Narrative. And that was one of the same things that she instilled was, when you stop talking, it gets dangerous. When we stop having these transparent conversations, it gets dangerous. We lose lives over that. And so I've tried to keep that in my day-to-day life, but I'm so glad that we are starting to talk about it more, because it is so important. And it's life-saving, to be honest.
Yeah, and to surround yourself with other people that are transparent about it, right? Like, there's some people that still have walls up, and that's okay, right? We all have our walls up, but surrounding yourself with a support network to talk through these things, to even, from a mentorship perspective, a lot of athletes face similar things straight out of this sport. Like, how was your transition out of this sport? I don't think that a lot of people recognize how challenging this is, because when your whole life is that of your sport, and I would imagine that you were very similar, because you were playing two sports, you were going to school, you were doing all these things, and then straight out of that.
Yeah, it was the hardest thing I think I've ever had to overcome. Matter of fact, I know it was the hardest thing I've ever had to overcome. Not because I couldn't do it, not because I didn't want to do it. I really didn't, but it was, at the time, I was 16 years old. I transferred high school. So it's hard. Number one, if you're a parent and you can avoid it at all costs, please don't make your kids transfer. It's the hardest thing. It's like legitimate, like, social, like, annihilation at that point.
I did too. So if my mom's listening, we transferred schools my junior year of high school, and it was such a challenge.
Same here. And fortunately for me, my football coach had moved with me as well. And it was kind of funny, because luckily I got there my first day, and he was like my first class of the day. And I was like,
Did you play football there too?
No. So I stopped playing because I had ended up getting injured. And so I decided to just focus on soccer and whatnot at the time. But, I said that to say this: transferring schools in the middle of high school was really hard, and losing the sport that I love, which at the time I was dealing with a lot of personal struggles, a lot of mental health issues. I was having a lot of anxiety. I'm severely depressed at the time. And I was dealing with a lot of familial problems. And, with that said, once I lost my sport, I lost my coping mechanism, and I didn't know what to do. Yeah. And that, number one, was, I look at things now and I try to reframe my thinking of not so much, why is this happening to me, but more so, what is this happening for? So now I look at it as a little bit different light, which is really helpful. But at the time I was like, why is this happening to me? I'm losing everything in my life. And I thought, the walls were coming in around me, and I was like, what's going on? I don't feel, this doesn't feel good for me. And now that I think about it and I look back, I didn't lose sports. I just found my passion in a different way. And I'm so glad that it happened the way it did, unfortunately or fortunately for me.
Well, and you were able to like go from playing the sport into broadcasting at a super young age. You've been able to stay in sports, which is amazing because a lot of people move out of sports straight out of school or straight out of their sport. And so you've been able to kind of stay within the game in some capacity.
Yeah, and the thing was, is at the beginning, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think that was gonna happen. I was like, okay, I'm done playing. What do I do now? And I think every athlete gets faced with that idea: is okay, I've stopped playing sports. What the heck comes next? And that thought right there is dangerous because it's something that it's become your identity. It's become, a personality trait. It's in some ways, I think being an athlete, just like being a journalist, is a lot of more of a diagnosis and a personality than anything else. But with that said, I was like, what do I do now? And so I knew I had this idea of what I wanted to do with my life, but I didn't know that I could do it. And I really needed the people that were in my life to believe in me at the time. And I'm glad that I had that.
Yeah, and that's something that like is so key. If you are an athlete listening to this, do not figure this out the minute you're done with your sport. Surround yourself with incredible people that have done this before, that have already gone successfully from the sport into a business capacity in whatever way. Surround yourself with those people and go ahead and start thinking through that prior to your career ending in sports.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to think about that beforehand. And I think for me, I didn't give that much thought because at the time I was 15, 16.
Well, you're a kid. I was the same way. Like I didn't know that I needed to do that. And I think that bringing awareness to this is so key because if you never know when your sports career is going to end. Let's just face it that way. You can get injured. Unfortunately, that happens. Something could happen, right? You have to have a plan for exiting outside of the sport. You just have to have that. And that's something that, we're really trying to bring awareness to and to help provide resources in that capacity. But don't think about it, when it's done.
Yeah. And I think, that's one of the things I've always had to think through too. And looking back on my life and looking back on my time as an athlete, and I really have to think about if I would have known my last game was my last game, I probably would have played it a little harder. And I say that to say this, we all have to think about it that way because you never know when it's going to be your last. You never know when, you're going to get injured. You never know when you're going to move. You never know when you're going to get cut from a team. You just never know. That's just the way that life works. You never know when you're going to lose your job. It's everything from sports to life in general, like whatever the case may be. You just don't know, especially in these times.
No, like my stepson he was a senior in high school last year when all the stuff with COVID was happening, and he's a baseball pitcher catcher. And so he was going through the recruiting process and all of that happened. Luckily he was able to get, recruited into a school, but like, you never know when something's going to happen. So you have to prepare for life outside of the sport.
You do 1000%. So I think it's important to think about what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? And, whether okay, I want to be a sports broadcaster for the rest of my life, or I want to work in corporate communications, or I want to be a politician, or I want to, whatever. I'm just throwing that out there. Like, think through those things. But whether you have that decision or not doesn't matter. Knowing who you want to be is where things really come into play, because everything else in life, I'm a firm believer of this, everything else in life falls into place. There's a Steve Jobs quote, and I actually have it tattooed on me. Well, not that quoted directly, but something similar. But you can only connect the dots looking back, but you can't connect them looking forward. So you may not know who you're going to be in the future, but thinking about it now so that when those things do come together down the line and you can think backwards and be like, okay, my time as an athlete led me to being this kind of person. It led me to having this job. It led me to finding this passion, whatever the case may be. Thinking about things like that, and like I said, who you want to be is the most important question that you can ever ask yourself. Do you want to be kind? Do you want to be mean? Do you want to be funny? Do you want to work in corporate America? Do you not want to work in corporate America? Like, what do you want to do? Think about those things. And I think that is so helpful for everyone, especially as you make a transition out of sports, because that can be challenging. And like I said, I speak from personal experience. It can be mentally very, very, very hard.
So what would you say to young girls that are wanting to go into a male-dominated sport?
That's so hard because I feel like I get asked that question all the time. But
well, I had to ask it because that's like, you know, for me, I think about my daughter. I'm like, if my daughter came to me and said, I wanted to play football, I'd be like, okay, but I wouldn't even know how to begin to like guide her down that path. So like, what would you say to young girls that want to play a male dominated sport?
do it because you won't regret it. It's going to be hard. It's going to be fun. And it's probably going to be one of the best experiences in your life. One of the hardest things about it, I will say, is and this sounds bad and it's going to sound controversial, but it can lead to some challenges with your other teams. So for me, it did lead to some challenges with my female soccer team. But with that being said,
why do you think that was? You know, because I see, you know, I do see the cattiness, and like I watch in school the girls, and I just remember my own personal experience in school, right? And I think that we're moving towards some solving some of those issues, but there's always going to be that level of cattiness, especially in like little girls. And sorry, like that's controversial, but it's so true.
There's no group of individuals that scare me more than a group of 12-year-old girls. If I see them, I will go to the other side of the street. I just can't handle it. But at the same time, when they tell you you're pretty, it's like the greatest compliment in the world, right? But with that said, you know, I think a lot of it had to do with cattiness that was going on within the team, and that was hard. And two, when you're a competitive soccer player, and I guess you may know this, especially with your daughter, that can get a little bit dicey depending on what team you play for.
It's political.
It is so political. It's disgusting that we put kids through that. It really is. But with that said, you know, first of all, I was getting backlash for the travel team that I played for. Then I was getting backlash because I was on the football team, and there would be times where I wouldn't have to miss practice, or I wouldn't miss practice, but I would have to go to a team dinner. So I may have to leave 5 minutes early, or I may have to make special situations. And with that being said, you know, when those circumstances would come up, I would have my teammates asking me all the time, well, do you actually want to play on this team? Do you actually want to be here? And I was like, no, of course I want to be here. It has nothing to do with whether I want to or not. It's just a matter of time's finite. We don't have enough of it. And if I could add in an extra 5 minutes, trust me, I would do it. I wish I could. But with that said, you know, like I said, back to your question about what advice I would give to girls, do it. If you don't know unless you try, and if you don't do it, I promise you're going to look back and think, what if I did this? Because I know if I never took the internship with D1 Highlights, if I never took the job with CBA, if I never went to Texas to go cover the football camp at AT&T Stadium and get to interview a Super Bowl winning coach, I would always think to myself, what if I had done these things? And I don't know if I would be okay with that answer.
That's amazing. Like I think about my experience in sports and just even your experience. Like if you're listening, you have young kids out there, like I totally encourage sports. Now it doesn't have to be gymnastics. It doesn't have to, but like get them involved in something that is a team environment to where they can build some of those skills, because it carries throughout all phases of life, right?
1,000% it does. And I think about that now every single day when I go to work. We are all on teams that we have to work with. And if I'm not working with my teammates, then I'm not doing my job correctly. I'm not doing it effectively. Yeah, there's individual pieces that go into it, but absolutely, if you have kids, get your kids into a sport, get them into a team event, get them into something, even if it's not, I didn't get into it until I was a senior in high school, but even if it's not sports, if it's theater, whatever the case is.
Choir, whatever it may be, get them involved in something that's a team environment.
1,000%. Because like I said about that Steve Jobs quote of you can only connect the dots looking backwards, I promise you, your kid may hate you in the moment when they're having to run sprints. There were several times where I was like, because my mom would call my coach and tell her, yeah, it's happening. But with that being said, I look back now and I'm like, okay, so that makes sense as to why I need to do this going forward. Or that makes sense as to whatever scenario may be applicable to your life. So they will thank you in the long run. I promise you, because sports are so great, and they're, number one, it's good for your kid to get them to work out, but also at the same time, like, building those kinds of relationships, it's unmatched with anywhere else.
And it's okay if it's hard. Like, and you know, I encourage my daughter, especially in travel soccer, that's tough. That is tough work. she's now going to play middle school and travel soccer. Like it is tough work, but you carry that into your life from, I mean, just moving on. Like, talk a little bit about some of the skills that you have carried over from your experience in sports into your business world.
So many. Oh my gosh. I would say at the top would be discipline. I try to be very disciplined, and I do want to mention this because I think it's important. There's a challenge to be had with coming from playing a team sport and always having your teammates around. And it can be with working out or whatever the case may be, like instilling habits in your day. But to not having that team environment where, like, okay, I know my teammates are going to be there at 6:30 in the morning, so I have to be there at 6:30 in the morning. There's something to be said that can be a little bit challenging about that. But number one, discipline was a huge thing for me. It's made my life so much easier because I'm a firm believer in what we do as humans. When we fall into hard times, we go back to our daily habits. We go back into our ritualistic behaviors because it's just what we do. But with that being said, I needed that discipline. I needed that. So discipline for sure. Time management as well. Playing 3 sports, it's not easy. And also, I had to have time to do my homework. I had to have time to, make time for myself, because if I didn't do that, I was going to lose my mind. I say this, time management is huge for me. And also, that is another one of the things that I say is making time for myself. I still struggle with it to this day because I believe I'm a firm believer. I put the team above myself at all times. But with that being said, if I don't make time for myself, I will not be an effective team member. I will not be an effective leader. I will not be an effective friend. I will not be an effective family member. And so with that being said, it came to a big halt where I was like, I have to create some boundaries here and definitely give myself time, whether it's sitting on the couch and just resting, whether it's going to do yoga on my patio, whatever the case may be. That's a huge thing for me too, is creating time for myself and setting boundaries for other people, because there's only so many hours in a day.
Well, you mentioned something like so powerful here, because I think a lot of organizations struggle with this. So you take high performance athletes, regardless of whether or not they're high school, college, professional level athletes, and then you put them into an organization where there may not be such a strong team environment. And so I'm really curious, Abby, based on your experience, how did you try to build out that discipline without having that very formalized team structure in the corporate world?
It's hard. I'm going to be honest. It's so hard. I still struggle with it every day. Like, I'm not going to lie. I want to be that person that wakes up at 5:30 in the morning and goes and works out and then journals and reads an entire book and whatever. I do want to be that person, but that's not my personality. I'm not owl. So number one, knowing who, a lot of this comes back to self-awareness, but knowing who you are, knowing what your habits will be is huge. For me specifically, I know I'm a night owl, so I know I'm more focused at nighttime than I am during the day, during the morning hours, and that's okay. But knowing that was really helpful, and knowing that, and knowing how to instill that into my workflow has really, really added some value for me. It can be hard going into a team that says they're a team but doesn't work like a team. That can be really, really hard. But I think for me, I try to be for others what I want them to be for myself. And so if I'm working on a team and things don't seem like there's great communication, or it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of, outside, I guess, chatter or whatnot, being that teammate that maybe you come off as really annoying, and that sucks, I'm sorry, but I think that's really important. I think it's so important to be that teammate, because if you're not going to do that, then who else is going to do it on the team? You have to be that.
Well, you step in and lead. If you see that as being an area or a gap, you step in and you're a leader. And I think that's a great thing as far as athletes having ingrained into their being, is they can step in and be a leader. Just give them the place to do so. And they're incredible leaders straight out of the gate. They just have to know how to translate that from the field onto.
Exactly. And I mean, for me, I get told a lot of times that I'm a bit of a bull. That I tend to be a little bit like I run people over, but that's not for anything. That's nothing bad, and that's just feedback that I've gotten. But I say that to say this, that for me is so helpful, because I'm naturally a leader. I'm naturally the kind of person that I don't care if there's 200 people in the room. If I want to ask a question, I'm going to ask a question, and I don't care if you like it. And that is a key phrase that my football coach used to say is, I don't care if you like it. But with that being said, you know, I would always be that person who is just that leader and step up. And so doing that every day, I think, especially in the corporate world, is huge, and it adds value because you may ask a question that not everyone else has thought about, not everyone else has thought through. You have an interesting perspective as an individual. So ask the question, be a leader, talk, communicate, because if you don't do it, someone else may have that same exact question and they're probably not asking you because they think it's a dumb question. I literally was on call just before this. And the two things I heard was the only questions that were dumb was the question that's not asked and the question that's asked repetitively. And so, because both of those show that you're not learning. And so with that being said, you know, using both of those things and going forward, ask those questions, be a leader, communicate with your teammates, even if it comes off a little bit bulldozer-ish, and that's okay. That is totally okay if you manage to be an effective leader, because at the end of the day, somebody has to do it.
This is like, I could literally talk to you for hours and hours and hours. And I'm sure that like we need to have a part 2 to dive into this. But I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. I can't thank you enough for joining and just sharing your genius to everybody. It's been such an impactful conversation. How do people follow your journey?
Yeah, so this is hilarious to me. Ironically enough, when I started working at D1 Highlights, I jokingly made my name Abby with 1B on social media. Like literally spelled out ABYWITHONE. Because no one was spelling my name right. It's spelled ABY. But with that said, you can find me on social media at Abby with 1B. I also have a website, abbywith1b.com. You can add me on LinkedIn. It's just Abby Goodman. But please reach out. I'm always happy to have conversations. I always want to connect with people. I'm a people person. I deal in people. I love working with people. I love talking to people. So yeah, please reach out anytime. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, all of it. I always love to connect with others.
Well, and to everybody listening, thank you so much for joining in the call. Mom, Grandma, thank you for your being #1 fans and your support always. And we do these chats. I do Sports to Suits once a week. I'm kind of playing up on the times a little bit. So just follow the LinkedIn or Facebook posts that I make, and looking forward to continuing the conversations. And we'll definitely, Abby, have to do a part 2.
Yes, let's do it. This was so much fun, and I think it was so beneficial for my own learning. If nothing else, I love having transparent conversations. So I'm more honored that you had me on, and I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation, and I'm excited for this part 2.
Awesome. Well, good to see you, and everybody tune in next week. We'll see you soon.